Hello, welcome to Appreciating Drama. Here we are going back in time, almost 2500 years ago, where drama slowly unfolded in Greece during the time of Aristotle, who was an authority on literature at that time. So, when we look at drama of that time, it is entirely different from that we have seen or we have heard of. Actually, drama has its origin in poetry, because in the beginning it was only the chorus, there were no actors. There were a group of people who were reciting or narrating a story. Only after that we find a single character coming to the stage from chorus. Then more characters are added, and gradually the chorus is pushed back into the background. So when we deal with drama of that time, there are many terms that we come across which will have a different meaning. So please keep that in mind, that we are going into a very ancient time. We are trying to explore that ancient world of drama, where things were entirely different. Of course, today we know drama has evolved. It is almost extinct, because today's movies or TV serials have taken the place of drama. So let us go back to the times when the drama gradually appeared on the face of the earth. So we will see the term drama, the etymology, the origin of drama. Drama is a literary composition meant to be staged. So it is supposed to be presented on a stage. The term drama is derived from the Greek word dran, which means to act. So from this we can understand drama had the origin in Greece. Aristotle's Poetics deals with the dramatics. So Aristotle lived in the 4th century BC. BC means before Common Era. It's almost like BC. So the first literature on drama is Aristotle's Poetics, which dealt with poetry and also drama. Interestingly, drama was actually part of poetry. We will see that later. According to Aristotle, the aim of drama is to instruct and delight the spectators. So these are the two functions of drama. First, you have to instruct. Instruct means to teach some moral lessons, and also to delight. Delight means to entertain. He says that drama is an imitation of human action. So according to Aristotle, drama has to imitate human action or human life. We say art imitates life. Definitely that is true. Whatever it is, art is based on human life or human experience. Drama originated in ancient Greece, Athens, precisely around 600 BC. During the festivals of Dionysus, the god of nature, fertility, and wine. There was much ritualized dancing and singing. So, drama came out of this ritualized dancing and singing, which was part of their religion. The god of Dionysius, which was the god of nature, fertility, and wine. So, they tried to please that god by singing and dancing. Just like we have in Kerala, if you study art forms of Kerala, like Kathakali or Theyyam, they are closely related to religious festivals and rituals. Two types of plays originated from such celebrations. They are tragedy, which presented the serious side, and comedy, which represented the lighter side of human life. So, the first form of drama was actually tragedy. Now, tragedy has a different meaning, not the meaning that we have today. Tragedy only meant that this drama is dealing with a serious topic, that's all, not the meaning that we have today. And comedy, of course, represented the lighter side, humor. Now, the basic elements of drama, they are tragedy, comedy, and also tragic comedy. We will see them in detail. First, we will deal with tragedy. What is tragedy? Again, we have to go back to our philosopher and guide Aristotle. He defines tragedy as the imitation of an action that is serious, complete, and of certain magnitude, means significance, importance, in language embellished with each kinds of artistic ornaments. Embellished means decorated. Now, what are the meaning of artistic ornaments? The several kinds being found in the separate parts of the play, in the form of action and not narrative. So, a tragic story or tragedy has to be dealing with a topic that is rather serious. It should be very significant. It cannot be trivial or silly matter, and the language has to be kind of standard, not ordinary language you cannot use, and in the form of action and not narrative. So, you are not narrating anything or trying to explain anything, but you are trying to act it. There should be action basically. Through pity and fear effecting catharsis or the proper purgation of these emotions. So, the ultimate aim of tragedy is catharsis. And what is catharsis? It is cleaning or cleansing of human emotions. I will try to explain that. For example, we all have got a lot of emotions and feelings, but some of the most powerful feelings or emotions, if they are not expressed, it can lead to real problem. So, we need to express those. We need to let those feelings or expressions or feelings out. Only then we feel relaxed. So, the aim of drama or tragedy was to effect catharsis or cleaning of human emotions or letting up of these pent up energies or pent up emotions. Aristotle regarded tragedy as the highest form of poetry. So, drama was actually considered a part of poetry. And Aristotle divides poetry into drama, lyric poetry, and epic. So, these were the three types of poetry, that is drama, lyric poetry, and epic. Tragedy is a serious play that deals with the misfortunes and sufferings of man. So, usually tragedy focuses on sufferings of human being or misfortunes, what can happen to a man, maybe like accidents, sickness, or such kind of unfortunate events in human life. The tragic hero is neither too virtuous nor too vicious, but his misfortune or fall is brought about by some error or frailty. So, our tragic hero is neither too bad nor too good. He is an ordinary person like any of us. But there is an element of weakness in him. And it is this particular frailty or weakness that causes his downfall. And Aristotle called it hamartia, which means tragic flaw. So, to show some examples of tragic flaw, we have got Macbeth, whose tragic flaw was ambition and arrogance and ambition in Julius Caesar. So, these are the classic example of tragic flaw, especially in Shakespearean plays. Tragedy excites pity and fear in the minds of the audience. It has a humanizing effect. That means the viewer or the audience become one with the tragic hero. So, when the tragic hero is suffering, the audience also is suffering. You know that when you are watching a movie, we become one with the hero. So, when something happens to the hero, we also feel that. When the hero is attacked, we feel we are being attacked. So, that is exactly what is happening in a tragedy. What is happening to the hero, the tragic hero has a kind of cathartic impact, that is humanizing impact on the viewer, thus resulting in the purgation of their emotions. So, when you are crying or when you are bursting into tears after watching a tragedy, actually it helps you to relieve yourself. You become relaxed after that emotional outburst, and that is actually the ultimate aim of a tragedy. Aristotle divides the plot of tragedies into two kinds. According to Aristotle, there are two types of tragedies. They are simple and complex. And what is the basis for this division? The distinction is made on the basis of whether the plot is accompanied by peripeteia and anagnorisis. Let us deal with those two terms. Peripeteia means reversal of fortune or the situation. So, when something happens and suddenly things take a new turn, that is reversal of fortune. Then anagnorisis, it means recognition or discovery or change from ignorance to knowledge. That means the hero comes to realize certain things, maybe realize certain flaws in himself, or realizes about other people's secrets or their vices, whatever it is. So, in a simple plot, there are no puzzling situations like peripeteia or anagnorisis. That means only in a complex plot we have peripeteia and anagnorisis. When these two are absent, then it becomes a simple plot. Anagnorisis of Oedipus the king. So, there is a famous drama called Oedipus Rex or Oedipus the king. Now, in that plot, he realized that he had killed his own father and married his mother without knowing it. So, when you go through the story of Oedipus, you find that fate is playing a part there. Somehow, without knowing, Oedipus is marrying his mother after killing his father. And today in psychology, we have what do you call Oedipus complex. I think you can find out more about Oedipus complex from net. Next, we come to comedy. Aristotle defined comedy as an imitation of men worse than the average. So, comedy dealt with, let's say, silly people, people of low class, people worse than the average, because people above average was supposed to be dealt with in tragedy, not comedy. So, it depicts some sort of laughable error or disgrace that elicits some emotion in the audience, such as embarrassment or delight. So, we have some weakness or fault or error with a particular person, which we laugh at. Even today, when people have got some weakness, we try to laugh at them, ridicule them. That's what is exactly done in a comedy. The roots of comedy lie deep in satirical verse. Satirical verse means it's a poem where we find human folly and vice are scorned or ridiculed. So, we have got human weakness or vice, certain evils are there inherent in some human beings. So, we try to ridicule them or make fun of. That's what is satirical verse. So, satire is actually kind of indirectly we are trying to criticize people of great importance, like politicians or religious leaders. We try to mock them. That's what is satire. Satirical verse itself owes its origin to the earlier Phailey songs sung in honor of Dionysus, the god of fertility. So again, we are going back to the Greek tradition, where we had people singing and dancing in honor of Dionysus, the god of fertility, wine, and all that. Phailey songs means actually songs related to human reproduction. We have got in Hindu religion, we have got Shivalinga, the human phallus, which is worshipped. So similarly, in Greek civilization also we had worship of human reproductive organs like Shivalinga. Comedy represents men as worse than they are, while satire ridicules personalities. Comedy ridicules general vices. So satire is actually attacking the person, direct attack, but comedy is only making fun of human weakness or human errors or faults. The purpose of comedy was to correct manners and conduct. So the purpose of comedy was to correct, to rectify human errors in their manners and also in the conduct, behavior. Nicholas Udall's Ralph Roister Doister 1550 was the earliest English comedy, and the earliest Greek tragedy was Aristophanes' Acharnians, that is in 425 BC. Now we come to the third type, that is tragic comedy. So it's a hybrid, a combination of both tragedy and comedy. Tragic comedy is a type of drama which intermingled the characters, subject matter and plot forms of both tragedy and comedy. Thus, the important agents in tragic comedy included both people of high degree and people of low degree. So, it is not only the subject matter, but it is also about people involved in the drama, because we know that in tragedy you find only people of high level, like kings, rulers and all that, they were involved. Whereas in comedy you have the ordinary man on the street. But here you have people from all sections of the society. Tragicomedy represented a serious action which threatened a tragic disaster to the protagonist, yet by sudden reversal of circumstance turns out happily. So they are bringing out the elements of both tragedy and comedy. Maybe till the end of the drama you find a kind of tragic situation. Maybe only the closing scene you find the protagonist is saved by some kind of intervention, like in the example of Merchant of Venice. You know the story, I hope, where you have got Antonio, the protagonist, and Shylock, the villain, the moneylender, and Portia, of course, coming acting like a kind of lawyer trying to save Antonio. So Merchant of Venice is a best example of tragic comedy. So unless Portia had helped him, Antonio would have definitely been in trouble. So the tragicomic genre was adopted by Shakespeare in his Cymbeline, The Winter's Tale, and The Tempest. So these are examples of tragicomedy. Now we come to the constituent parts of drama. First, we have the plot. What is plot? The order of events occurring in a play make its plot. Essentially, the plot is the story that the play narrates. So in a drama you find a lot of events happening, and those events are arranged properly, and that is actually the meaning of plot. And basically it is the story, the storyline. The entertainment value of a play depends largely on the sequence of events in the story. So unless today we call it a script, the script of the movie. So unless the script is good, the movie or the drama will not come good. The connection between the events and the characters in them form an integral part of the plot. So how the characters interact and how the events unfold, all this depends on the plot. What the characters do, how they interact, the course of their lives as narrated by the story, and what happens to them in the end constitute the plot. That is what is actually the plot of the drama. Next we have dialogue or thought. Thought means actually the idea, and the idea of the writer is coming through dialogue. That's it. The story of a play is taken forward by means of dialogues. So actually script includes the dialogue actually. The story is narrated to the audience through the interaction between the play's characters, which is in the form of dialogues. So the story is unfolding through the mouth of the characters, through their dialogue. The contents of the dialogues and the quality of the delivery have a major role to play in the impact that the play has on the audience. So the quality of the dialogue and also how the dialogue is expressed, how it is delivered, that is what matters if it has to make an impact on the audience. It is through the dialogues between the characters that the story can be understood. So we understand the story only through the dialogues, the interaction between the characters. They are important in revealing the personalities of the characters. So they portray the character, and dialogues are the ones that really gives life to the character, apart from their acting, of course. Next comes music or chorus. This element includes the use of sounds and rhythm in dialogues as well as music compositions that are used in the plays. So music means sounds and rhythm in dialogue. Dialogue itself can be kind of with a kind of music, can be singing or a kind of melodious way of articulating, and also music compositions. We know that especially in Indian situation. We give a lot of importance to music, whether it is in drama or movie. The background score, the songs and the sound effects used should complement the situation and the characters in it. So, whatever music, it has to support the characters. It should not be out of place. It has to be relevant. The right kind of sound effects or music, if placed at the right points in the story, act as a great supplement to the high and low points in the play. So, depending on the mood, the music will change, whether it is happy situation or sad or kind of thrilling. So, depending on the mood and the situation, the music will have to change. The music and the lyrics should go well with the play's theme. If the scenes are accompanied by pieces of music, they become more effective on the audiences. So, we know that music has a very important role to play to make the play more effective. Chorus in drama are those who perform vocally in a group as opposed to those who perform singly. So, here you find that the beginning there was only the chorus there. There were no actors at all. Only later on you find one actor coming out of that chorus group and then start acting. Then slowly more characters are added and gradually you find the chorus is relegated to the background. So, the chorus in classical Greek drama was a group of actors who described and commented upon the main action of a play with song, dance and recitation. So, actually the whole chorus was actually acting there. There are no single actors. It is like group acting. And they were singing, dancing and reciting together. Greek tragedy had its beginnings in choral performances, in which a group of 50 men danced and sang dithyrambics. Dithyrambics means lyric hymns in praise of the god Dionysus. So, we find that in Greek tragedy we had a kind of chorus which consisted of some 50 men and they were singing this lyric hymns in honor of the god Dionysus. In the middle of the 6th century BCE, the poet Thespis repeatedly became the first true actor. That means till then there are no characters apart from the chorus. So, now you find a person is taken out of that chorus and made the main actor. When he engaged in dialogue with the chorus leader. So, now he is separated from the chorus and then this character, this actor is interacting with the chorus. Choral performances continued to dominate the early plays until the time of Aeschylus. Again a Greek tragedian. His famous play was Agamemnon, and this Aeschylus is known as the father of tragedy. He lived in the 5th century BC, who added a second actor and reduced the chorus from 50 to 12 performers. So, you find gradual reduction of the chorus because now more and more people are taken for acting or they are given the role of actors. So, the chorus is now getting reduced. From 50 they have become 12. Earlier only a single character interacted with the chorus. Now you find more members of the chorus becoming characters. Sophocles, 496 BC, who added a third actor, increased the chorus to 15 but reduced it to a mainly commentarial role in most of his plays. For an example, of this role as shown in the play Oedipus the King. So again Sophocles comes and then he reduces the number of chorus, and then he is adding a third actor, and the role of a chorus is now reduced, mainly making comments and all that. The chorus in Greek comedy numbered 24, and its function was displaced eventually by interspersed songs. So gradually the chorus is getting less importance, and now they are reduced, and they were mainly having songs in between. Now we come to character. The characters that form a part of the story are interwoven with the plot of the drama. So definitely it is the characters that act out the drama or give expression to the story. Each character in a play has a personality of its own and a set of principles and beliefs. So character means a person with a set of principles and beliefs which guide them. Actors in the play have the responsibility of bringing the characters to life. Yes. So we know that a person is given a character, he has to act that role, or rather he has to live that role, live that character. The main character in the play who the audience identifies with is the protagonist. So protagonist means the hero. Usually we always support the hero, or we try to sympathize with the hero. The character that the protagonist conflicts with is the antagonist or villain. So after the protagonist we have got the antagonist or the villain, and he is usually having conflict with the hero. He fights, or he is always moving against the main character or the protagonist. And the way in which the characters are portrayed and developed is known as characterization. Now we come to diction. Diction means choice of words, especially with regard to correctness, clearness, or effectiveness. So diction comes, of course, in dialogues, the way they are expressing the ideas through words especially. So the words should be chosen very carefully. These words has to be proper, it has to be clear, and it has to be effective. Any of the four generally accepted levels of diction, like formal, informal, colloquial, or slang, may be correct in a particular context but incorrect in another, or when mixed unintentionally. So these different levels of diction, they are formal. Formal means ordinary way of talking, then informal, colloquial, or slang. We have come across all these words in academic writing, of course. So all these different dictions can be used, but it should suit that particular occasion or character. Most ideas have a number of alternate words that the writer can select to suit his purposes, like children, kids, youngsters, youth, and brats, for example, all have different evocative values. So when you hear the word children, a kind of image comes to our mind, or kids, youngsters, again different image comes to your mind, youth, or when you say brat, suddenly kind of spoiled boy. So each of these words have a different connotation, and they bring a different imagery to our mind. That's why we should choose the words very carefully, otherwise we can give wrong message to the audience. Next we come to Spectacle. Spectacle means it has something to do with vision. Spectacle, specs we say. So the visual part, the visual element. What is the visual element in drama? While the dialogue and music are the audible aspects of drama, the visual element deals with the scenes, costumes and special effects used in it. So ultimately drama is viewed. So the visual aspect is very, very important. How the drama is presented, how the stage is set, what are the properties used, the costume, the music, special effects, all that. The visual element of drama, also known as the spectacle, renders a visual appeal to the stage setup. So the stage has to be accurately and properly set. Only then it will have a kind of visual appeal. The costumes and makeup must suit the characters. Besides, it is important for the scenes to be dramatic enough to hold the audiences to their seats. So the visual element is what actually attracts the audience, and they will be glued to their seats throughout. The special effects used in a play should accentuate the portion or character of the story that is being highlighted. So the special effects today, it is high. We have got very sophisticated special effects and all in movies, but those days they were absent. Special effects may be kind of lighting and all that. The word limelight comes from lime. They used to burn the lime for light on the stage. So the word limelight comes. Of course, today things have changed. We have got a lot of other special effects. Computer age. Now we come to three unities. What is the meaning of unities? So in drama, unities means three principles. Again, this unity is derived by French classicists from Aristotle's Poetics. So everything is based ultimately on Aristotle. They require a play to have a single action represented as occurring in a single place and within the course of a day. So that is the meaning of unities. That means the play has to be happening in a single place, in a single day. These principles were called respectively unity of action, unity of place and unity of time. So that is the idea. First, there should be only single action. It should happen in one place and also in one day. But later on, these three unities were redefined in 1570 by the Italian humanist Lodovico Castelvetto in his interpretation of Aristotle, and they are usually referred to as Aristotelian rules for dramatic structure. Actually, Aristotle's observations on tragedy are descriptive rather than prescriptive. So according to this Italian humanist, he changed those rules or these three principles. He said Aristotle's theories on these three principles were merely descriptive, trying to describe, not prescribe, like trying to impose as a rule. And he emphasizes only one unity, that of plot or action. So as drama evolved, we know that it is not possible to restrict the plot or story to one particular action or one particular place or one particular day. The story can run for a long time. It can tell a story of a full human being, what is happening throughout his life. It is possible. So this unity of place and time and all became almost irrelevant later. So they said the only unity can be that of plot or action. Now we come to tragic hero. What is tragic hero? So tragic hero is literally device utilized to create a protagonist for a tragic work of literature. So in a tragedy, the main character is definitely the tragic hero. Without him, there cannot be a tragedy. A tragic hero is a character that represents the consequences that come from possessing one or more personal flaws or being doomed by a particular fate. So, the tragic hero is always suffering from a particular fault or weakness, or he is becoming a prey to fate. Traditionally, the purpose of tragic hero as a literary device is to evoke pity or fear in an audience through the protagonist's flaw and consequential downfall. So, the purpose of tragic hero was to evoke pity and fear in the minds of the audience, because when we try to sympathize with the tragic hero, when something happens to him, it affects the audience. So we feel sympathy towards him, or maybe we are also overcome by fear of what is going to happen to him and all that. So a tragic hero is the protagonist of a tragedy. Protagonist means hero. In his Poetics, Aristotle records the descriptions of a tragic hero to the playwright and strictly defines the place that the tragic hero must play and the kind of man he must be. So Aristotle is setting out certain rules regarding how to handle our tragic hero, what kind of person he should be and all that. So Aristotle based his observations on previous dramas. Many of the most famous instances of tragic heroes appear in Greek literature, most notably the works of Sophocles and Euripides. So it was based on the teachings of Aristotle that later the tragic heroes were created. Now we come to the basic structure of tragedy. A Shakespearean tragedy traditionally follows the Freytag pyramid of dramatic structure, which consists of 5 parts. Freytag's analysis is derived from Aristotle's Poetics, that had a 3-part view of a plot structure. So Freytag's 5 parts theory was based on Aristotle's Poetics, where Aristotle had only 3 parts. So let's see the 5 parts. They are exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and denouement. So that's a French word. It is pronounced as denouement. We will see each of these elaborately. First, exposition. The exposition introduces important information to the audience that is vital to the unfolding action of the play. So exposition means actually introducing the theme to the audience. Exposition can also feature including, which clues the audience into the world of the play. So it gives some clues, some ideas about the play. Central themes and ideas are also conveyed. The atmosphere for the play is established. So those days it was very important to give a kind of introduction to the audience, so that the people have some idea about what is going to happen. Next is rising action. At the beginning of the rising action, the conflict is introduced and an incident occurs that sets the rising action in motion. So, you find that at the beginning itself, a kind of conflict is introduced, maybe between two characters. That is a rising action. Throughout the rising action, a series of events occur that lead to the climax. So, this whole steps are like kind of climbing a hill. So, it starts from exposition and then going up to the rising action. It culminates in the climax, which is the top of the hill. It is at this point in the play that the tragic hero suffers from the fatal flaw in character and makes errors of judgments. So, here in this rising action, you find the weakness of the tragic hero. He makes certain blunders, errors of judgment. Now, we come to the top of the hill, that is the climax. The climax is the turning point in the play that changes the protagonist's fate. So, this is the most important area of play, that is climax. This climax is the consequence of the events that occurred in the rising action. So, there was a kind of conflict happening during the time of rising action, which leads to the climax. After the climax, the tragic hero is more controlled by his actions than in control of his action. So, here he is suffering the consequence of his blunders or his mistakes. That is the climax. It is the most dramatic event of the story. So, here this climax is what is the most important part of the story. Now, we come to the falling action. So, from the top of the hills, now we are slowly climbing down. The falling action is the sequence of events that follow the climax and end in resolution. So, the falling action happens immediately after the climax, and it is now moving towards the resolution of the play. It is the opposite of the rising action, which leads up to the climax. So, rising action is taking the whole play to the climax, and then falling action is moving downwards. It is now taking the play to its end. It will demonstrate the consequences of the climax. What are the consequences? So, what the tragic hero is undergoing, the consequences, or he is suffering. Now, we come to the last part, which is pronounced as denouement. This word itself is derived from the French word meaning untie the knot. So, untying, trying to resolve the whole issue. There is a resolution. It is a literary device defined as the resolution of the issue of a complicated plot. So, till then, no, everything was tied together, entangled, and here this entanglement is now slowly resolved. It restores order to the narrative world of the main characters, and in doing so provides resolution and a feeling of finality for the audience. So, here we are finding that there is a, from disorder and complication, kind of order is restored here in the closing part of the play. In Romeo and Juliet, the denouement comes when there is a declaration of peace between the two feuding families, that's Montagues and Capulets. And we know that Romeo and Juliet story is a tragedy where you find the hero and heroine both are committing suicide. The whole reason was that their families were, traditionally enemies, feuds, family, war happening. So at the end you find after the death of these two people, the families are coming together and declaring peace. So with that we come to the end of the first session on appreciating drama. I hope you understood, though not fully, most of it you must have understood. So we will continue with this in the next session. Till then, goodbye and have a great day.